He's with the sports guys at night and on the weekends, and he joins us every Monday. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, McGraw. How's it going?
I read with great interest your colleague Derek Gold's story about the lack of, Matheny now going to tell people when they're allowed to go to the mound, even Molina. And each pitcher is going to have their own set of signs and secondary signs. It got so confusing. It took me 2.5 hours to read the story. There could be massive miscommunications in baseball with all these, not being able to go and talk to the pitcher now.
Oh, it's all worth it, though. Think of the 10 seconds per game that it might help shave off there. So, I mean, really, I think it's worth all the headache and the gray hair and changing everything on the fly going into a season. I think it's for the best, to be honest.
I think, right?
No,
well, hold on a second.
I'm kidding. This is a joke. I mean, this is a joke. Rob Manfred is obsessed with tweaking and changing, and I'm starting to wonder if Rob Manfred and his cronies even like baseball, let alone love baseball. I mean, games have to evolve. I get that, but to make changes that satisfy, what end, I don't understand. I mean, they're talking about, one of the things that they're getting closer and closer to implementing, it's going to make people go crazy, is this off season, the baseball leaders, the guys who make the decisions, the suits, floated putting a runner at second base in extra innings in the All-Star game and spring training. It didn't happen, but they keep moving that. They've already started doing that at the lowest levels of the game. I mean, they're going to do that eventually. They're trying to implement this. They can't leave it alone. They're convinced that people want it to be faster and faster, and they're going to keep trying to change things until they get their way. So fans who want to keep it the way it is, they should make their opinion heard because the people in charge seem determined to keep changing the game.
Here's what I don't understand. First of all, they implemented rules last year to speed up the game, and it got longer. So, doing away with the intentional walk didn't speed up the game any. It just made it longer, or the games were longer. Here's an idea. Why don't they enforce the actual strike zone that's in the rule book? Letters to the knees. That's a strike. That'll speed up the game.
Yeah, or they could actually look into why the baseballs are flying out of park like bouncy balls. People love offense, but if they really want to shorten games, offense creates longer games. The fastest games are 1-0 games where it's a pitcher's duel and a defensive defensive highlight reel. But when balls are flying out of the stadium, offense leads to more games, longer games. But Rob Manfred showed no interest in figuring out why all of a sudden home runs just happen to be increasing at an alarming rate. And pitchers and hitters alike were both talking about how the baseballs were different. Rob Manfred showed zero interest in getting to the bottom of that. So we're getting mixed messages here for sure.
Well, he was going to have a meeting, but that would have been the 7th meeting of the day, and so he can't sit and talk about it. All right, so with that on the sidelines, how does this Arizona basketball player play and the coach get fired or suspended? How does that work?
Well, good question. It kind of seems hit or miss on how teams are deciding to do this. Some teams are sitting these players and saying that they're going to wait until they get more clarification on their eligibility. Arizona seems to think, well, whatever. We're going to probably get the hammer anyway, so we might as well let the kid play. Now, why the coach has decided to step away from the team at this time, it's really hit or miss on how teams decide to try to get out in front of the punishment by the NCAA, and that's what this is. So that's important to point out. It's not the NCAA coming in and saying, hey, the coach needs to sit, the kid can play. It's the school trying to decide what's the best for us to save our rear ends before the NCAA hands out a punishment. You'll probably see some teams that are caught up in this ban themselves from the postseason. You'll probably see some guys not play. You'll probably see some coaches, take self-imposed suspensions to try to lessen the punishment when it does come. But Arizona got it pretty good. I mean, Coach Miller is apparently on record on a wiretap talking about paying $800,000. So that's not really where you want to be. I mean, being connected is one thing. Being on the phone, recorded, saying, "Look, when it comes to money, I handle it," Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Well, if SMU got the death penalty because of lack of institutional control, is there anything that shows a lack of institutional control than the coach saying, "Hey, when it comes to the payments, call me"?
Yeah, I don't know that any school will get the death penalty again, man. And now certainly some have deserved it, but if you're not going to give it to a Penn State or a Baylor,
right,
then I don't know who you'd give it to now. I think the truth of it is they realize how much that cripples universities, and they want to make – it's all about money, man. There's so much money in the game. That's what this is another example of.
Yes, there's a lot of money in the game. Just make sure –
free market system. It's when something makes money and you try to convince people it doesn't, there's always going to be cracks and crevices where the business is done.
Yes.
So the NCAA wants to act like it's not a business-making and not a money-making venture for the players. Well, then there will always be markets that create themselves to pay the players because what they're doing is valuable. It's worth money.
Right.
Now, the NCAA likes to ignore that, but other people don't. So the NCAA can either change and embrace it and find a way to try to do it above board and right, or there will always be agents or shoe companies or AAU guys or NBA. There's always going to be people who are willing to get these guys paid, even if it's something relatively small. Ayton's worth more than $100,000. I mean, he's probably worth $1 million to Arizona.
That was my first point. The guy should have.
There's always going to be some money in motion.
The guy should have held out for a lot more money than $100,000. And second of all, yes, there's a lot of money when it comes to NCAA basketball. So let's spend a fortune making sure the players get none of it.
Exactly, right? I mean, a simple way to maybe try to look at doing this would be don't pay the guys. Don't give them a salary. Let them get paid, their scholarship and their cost of living and all that stuff. But then just allow them the opportunity to make money off their likeness. Allow them to have a sponsorship. Allow them to have a shoe deal.
Right.
Not every player would have that, but not every player is worth as much money.
No.
That way the schools would be removed from it. You're not having to give, the softball player the same money as Ayton. But, they would be allowed to have, ways of other income. Now, the schools flinch at that idea, but I think that's probably the easiest way to do this. And if you do that, then you don't have guys running guys to different programs without even the kids' knowledge sometimes. The worst examples of this are guys who steer kids to certain schools for a payday, and the kid doesn't even know about it.
No, just as long as the coach gets a shoe deal. The players, no shoe deal. The coach, who doesn't even wear the sneakers, he has to wear the shoe deal. Yes.
Yeah, if you're talking money, talk to me. Don't forget that.
That's right. All right, while we have you here, I have a few seconds left. What's going on with the Blues, and how worried should we be?
Oh, be very worried. I mean, I'd put the urgency level at the level of 10. They're falling apart. They're massive losing streak, season worst. They are starting to whine about the fans being too tough on Jake Allen, which I thought that was a terrible comments coming from the locker room. I mean, if fans show up to see you lose another home game and you're telling them they shouldn't be booing the goalie.
Right.
Even if it's true, you don't say that. Real honest, I think Yochio is for lack of a better word, pulling out his hair on trying to how to motivate this team.
Right.
And I'd be interested to see if Army does something at the trade deadline, not to make them a contender because they're not one move away, but to just kind of send a shockwave through the room and say, look, we're not going to tolerate this here. We need to kind of shake up the culture a little bit. So, yeah, very worried.
When's the deadline? Today?
Yes, this afternoon, 2 p.m., I believe.
2 p.m. Stay away from Tom Stillman. That's what I would do.
Maybe he went out to hunt or something to stay away from it. But I can't imagine this has got to be frustrating for everybody involved. But it just seems like the past couple games, the effort hasn't been there, and that's the most maddening part.
Ben Frederickson, always a pleasure every Monday with us, STLtoday.com, and with the Sports Guys at Night. Ben, have a good week. Thanks.
You bet, guys. See you.